Welcome back to Your Average Witch, where every other Tuesday we talk about witch life, witch stories, and sometimes a little witchcraft. This week I'm talking with Quin, an author and podcaster in England. We talked about spirits, community, and how you can build community near you. Now let's get to the stories. Hello, Halo, welcome to the show.
Hi, Kim. Nice to be here.
It's nice to have you. Can you please introduce yourself and let everybody know who you are and what you do and where they can find you?
Absolutely. I feel very formal in these moments where we're just sort of coming into an introduction. So, hi, I'm Quin. I'm a pagan author. I'm a storyteller, and I am a witch and have been for as long as I can remember, though I wouldn't have called myself that when I was small. Few key interesting things about me. I am absolutely fascinated and always have been by fairies. So sometimes I describe myself as pixie-led. I live in the wild, wet, windy West Wales in the UK. So the ocean is just the other side of the wall behind me. And I am actually officially a doctor of philosophy and storytelling. I teach magic, specifically embodied witchcraft and working with spirits and the fair folk through my courses and things, which I host at the Enchanted Academy. And you can find all of my books, my classes, my many, many live streams and ridiculousnesses and random adventures at haloquin.net. That's the net where I catch everything.
I like that. Can you please tell me what it means to you when you call yourself a witch?
So, the word witch is such a huge and fascinating and complicated term, right? And I first encountered it in the context of, I was about 11 when I was first stepping into the magical spaces and realizing that adults really believed in this. And what's more, there were books on this, actual books on this. Like, that makes it real in the world, right? And so I encountered it in the context of neo-Wicca, that kind of modern broad church of Wicca. So the term witch, that's where I came across it. But I very quickly realized that I wasn't Wiccan, because that's a particular, especially in the UK, like that's a particular religious style of magical practice and of paganism. And it's a particular set of paths. So I was like, right, okay, well, that means then I'm a witch. And at that point, what it meant for me was a person who practices magic and believes in and follows and works with the pagan deities and spirits, who engages with the living spirits of the landscape, of the world, who I was brought up talking to trees and treating trees and plants as people. So like that animistic childhood understanding of the world was then woven in as I grew up and as I began to add in these practices. So the emphasis then for me became on the craft of witchcraft. It was something that I did and something that I was in the world. And so my understanding of it over the last 30 years has sort of evolved from that starting point. And of course, over those years, I discovered that it's got these historical roots in practices of Malefica. That was where the term witch was originally applied. And I looked at it and I went, oh God, should I stop using it then? And I'd sort of use the word witch for myself in front of people who weren't pagan and who didn't have the same context I did. And they'd ask me if I'd slept with the devil, or if I thought I'd murdered someone, right?
Okay. Sorry.
Yeah. No. Like, that was my response. I'm like, well, no, don't be silly. And at that point, I started describing it as a religious path, using it as synonymous for pagan. But where I came back to this understanding was, in the world that we live in, anyone who practices a subversive form of magic, and I say subversive in that it's not like the mainstream doesn't think that it's something you should be doing. And let's be honest, the mainstream overculture doesn't think that we should be lighting candles and praying to the fairy queen and singing her songs and dancing with her under the full moonlight, right? Or lighting candles to the moon goddess for healing, or talking to the horned god and the wild god of Pan to find out what's going on in the forests. Like, they don't think we should be doing that, because that runs counter to the current worldview, which is materialistic, rationalistic, and if you really want to go and find spirit, go and look for God in the church. So I realized, like, this term witch, by using it and using it in the modern sense of someone who practices a folklore-rooted, spirit-based magical practice in the context of modern-day paganism, that's how I was using it. But using it in the world and being open about applying that term to myself, I was reminding myself and them that what I did is considered odd, is considered outside of the bounds of what is kind of mainstream acceptable, even if it's only working towards uplifting people and healing and supporting and building relationship and community with the spirits of the land and with each other. Like, all of my magic is around that, healing our relationship to ourselves and with other people and working with those spirits. And even with those really positive things, what we do, or what I do, is considered to be odd and weird and somewhat should be kept in the shadows. So I kept hold of the term witch kind of for that reason. And then also I'm attached to and have spent many, many years being a member of the reclaiming tradition of witchcraft, and I'm an initiated fairy witch, Anderson fairy witch. So it's the word that is the term that is for people who practice the paths that I practice. So that's the long answer. The short answer is witchcraft is working magic in relationship with the spirits of the world and building community with those spirits in order to change the world. In my case, I hope for the better.
That is one of my favorite responses so far. I love the long answer. I love it.
Yeah. I actually wrote a piece on my blog about it, like about why I use that term in response to be honest, it was my mum, because I've got books out where I say I'm a witch, and she knows I've called myself a witch since I was 10 or 11. And every now and then she comes back to me and she's like, "Are you sure?" Because like people ask me, "What do you do?" and you know, and I say that you call yourself a witch, and they get really scared and worried, and they think it means all these things. And I'm like, well, at one point it did, and it doesn't for the people within my communities, and it doesn't for me. But I've got to remember that what I do is still weird to most of the world. It's still heretical when we live in a rationalist, post-enlightenment, capitalist, materialist world. To go dancing with the spirits, that's heresy, right?
Yeah, how does that make you any money? Then you absolutely should not do that. Or right? It doesn't make me any money, so.
Yes, more to the point, it doesn't make anyone else any money, so you shouldn't be doing it. But it's like, well, yeah, there's more to life than being a cog in someone else's machine. Thank you very much. This is where I come back to, like, it's that, for me, it's a network of, it's about being a relationship. And what I've found is that over my many, many years, most of the time I don't do spells in the way that people think of spells. I have at various points, and I know how to weave magic in spellcraft, and how to use the colors of candles and synthetic magic and symbols, and studying pentacles at the minute, from like Solomonic pentacles. So all of those things, I find the technical side of it really fascinating. But most of the time I don't need to do spells, because I've spent my life working in that magical space and building relationship with the spirits, and they look after me like I look after them. So it just
My heart.
makes it right.
Oh, I love it. So I'm going to go back a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
You were raised an animist, even if they
And
didn't
that,
call it that?
yeah, pretty much. It took me a long time to realize that. And when I described it that way on social media or something, I was like, oh, well, I was brought up an animist. And my mum messaged me and she's like, I'm so sorry. What have I done? Like, I made you weird. And I was like, no, mum, you know how you brought us up to talk to the trees, and like the trees are people, and don't pull the leaves off the plants because they have feelings too. And, you know, the rocks are beings that have lives of their own. And okay, we've got to clear out the ant's nest because they're causing problems, but, you know, they're still tiny, tiny people. The world is alive. And that's how I was brought up. Particularly by my mother, who mostly raised me, and the same for my brothers as well. Though they went a very different path with it. You know, it's sort of in the background for them. And yeah, when I started finding people describing animism, I was like, well, yeah, isn't that just how the world is? The world is alive.
Then dominionism comes in. But anyway.
Look, here's the thing, right? So as human beings, as people in the world, our natural default, if you look at children, if you look at cultures throughout history, our default way of engaging with the world is as alive, full of spirits, as animated. That's how we naturally engage with the world. And it takes a lot to beat that out of us with a materialistic, you know, I'm using catchphrases, but like materialistic, capitalist, like all of that, dominionist things, those models, they have to use that to beat out of us our relationship with the world as alive and enchanted.
I'm here. It didn't leave mute on. I'm just pondering. This is such a perfect conversation for now.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but I'm going to bring us back.
Absolutely.
Can you introduce us to your practice? Do you have any consistent things that you do? Maybe even a daily practice that you'll share?
Absolutely. So I have ADHD. I have an ADHD brain. And so consistency in terms of like things being identical every day, day in, day out, year in, year out, is not like, that's not my strong point. That's not the way I engage with things. Where I am reminded that I am consistent is that I always come back to those relationships. I come back to the magic. Even if I get distracted, I come back to those things. I consistently am engaged with them. So my daily practice shifts around that connection and that interrelationship. So the way that looks is that my magical practice is woven through, the foundations of it are woven throughout my life. And this is built up over many years, obviously. But it's things like when I step outside, or I'm coming back in on that threshold, I acknowledge and tune into and greet the spirits of the earth and sky and the energy and the powers and the beings of it. I mean, in my case, at the moment, I live right next to the ocean. So, you know, I send love to the ocean and remember that connection. When I go for a walk along the prom, sometime I have varying degrees of being able to walk depending on what my body is doing. So when I'm able to go for a walk, I will walk the land feeling into that connection, into those patterns in the earth. So it's that piece about relationship. And then in the morning, when I wake up, when I open my curtains, I will greet the world. And I quite often, so here is where it starts to look like a daily practice that you could like write down in a book, or that you could pick up and start doing as something that seems a bit more formal, something you can like feel like you're actually doing something. And I quite like it's colloquially known as the Valkyrie's prayer. So I'll open the curtain, and this comes from some heathen connections. And I'll say, "Hail day and day's sons, hail night and her daughters." And I say this every day, and it's gone out of my head because I'm saying it in front of people now. Hail day. And
we have Google. We can find it.
No,
I love that.
Come back in a second. But yeah, right. Like, so, and hail night and the daughters, watch over me with loving eyes and grant me victory. Hail to the gods, hail to the goddesses, and hail to the bountiful earth. Eloquence, grace, and native wit bestow upon me, and healing hands whilst I live. And so that's how I greet the world most mornings. And I won't say every morning, but it goes through my mind, even if I don't speak it out loud, when I open the curtains and see the daylight. And so many of my practices are woven into those points. When I pour myself my first cup of tea, I pour a cup of tea for the ancestors and the beloved and mighty dead. And I like say a little prayer that's sharing that with them and asking them to share that with our hungry dead, those that have been forgotten and haven't been fed. Because it's like, okay, well, I know that our ancestral spirits, many of us get forgotten, and many of us end up hungry in that space. And I'm like, okay, those of you that are here and are connected here, this is for you, and please share that with those of our tribe, our people, of humanity, of all of the peoples that are also not human, that are connected to us. Like, share it with them as well, that they may be fed, that all are well. And I come back to one of my core practices is from the Anderson Fairy tradition. So spell that Feri to distinguish it from the Fae, which I also work very much with. And that is the practice of aligning the triple soul. So aligning the parts of yourself within yourself, so that you're basically in this practice, you're tuning into all of the parts of yourself. You're kind of grounding, centering, and using your breath and a spoken prayer to come into alignment, so that you can listen to and hear and respond from and move in unison as all of the parts of yourself. Your body, your emotional self, your mental self, your rational self, your spirit self, however you want to divide those up. And that's how I describe it to people outside of the tradition, is like those parts, because those are easy enough to understand. And aligning that with the ground of being, God herself, the Holy Mother, like the Star Goddess, by whatever name you want to know her, and my spirits. So again, like there's a lot of pieces to it, but for me, those are the core things I come back to, is greeting the world, greeting the spirits, remembering my place in that network, in that community, and aligning myself so that I'm doing my best to bring all of me to my work, my play, my life, and all of me in alignment, so I'm not denying a part of myself or ignoring a part of myself in order to like prioritize the rational, well, I think I should be doing this, or the emotional, impulsive part, like whichever. I like try and bring it all together in alignment with those parts of me that are deeply connected to listening to the spirit and the magic.
That was beautiful. It moved me to tears, which I cut out. Don't worry about it. If you all were listening, especially if you're in the US right now, perhaps it moved you too, because this is not going to go out in February. I'm taking February off, but it's going to go out in March. So this is I don't know how to tell time. It's the first week of February, and if you think back what was happening then, you know why I'm having a hard time. So maybe it affected you. Maybe just go back and think about what it was like on February 4th.
Mm.
That is today, right? It is
Yeah,
the
that's
4th?
today.
Okay, because I don't use this computer a lot. Anyway, thank you. And I'm sure everyone else is thanking you as well.
Oh, it's
That
a.
said, could you tell me the biggest motive? I think I already know it at this point. Can you tell me what the biggest motivator is in your practice?
um, I mean, like what underlies everything for me is that it's about relationship. Absolutely, like all of it is about relationship. It's about being in relationship, particularly with the spirit world, and being. For me, my practice is like rooted in maintaining those connections and reminding myself that those beings are there and that they are around me, that I can lean on them, and that they also like there's a reason that I can lean on them, and that's that somehow what I do, they it feels like they guide me and they help direct me in those things, and somehow what I do they find is a benefit for them, and I think that's one of the reasons that I tell stories and that I teach and that I do almost weekly free circles and live streams in the Enchanted Academy, like where I'm sharing with people magical techniques or thoughts on things or stories or whatever, is because the spirits and the gods and the beings that I work with that are my family, even if it's like an extended and very strange or weird with a Y family, like, right? They're sharing their stories and opening those doors for people. It's building that relationship, building this bigger community that is bigger than any one of us, and bigger than just humans. Many of us have forgotten in our culture, and I forget all the time that I say our culture, like I'm in Britain, you're in the US, so we pretty much share these a lot of cultural touchstones. Like we forget that we're not alone, that we're not isolated. We forget that those spirits, that whole world, that whole network of spirits, some of which care deeply about us and some of which don't want anything to do with us because they've got their own things going on, right? But there's so many of them that are so close to us, and we isolate ourselves by imagining a division and imagining a materialist world. Even if we're pagan or magical, we forget because the rest of the culture tells us, oh no, it's just the material world, right? So that underlies the what that I do. The main motivator for the things that I choose to integrate into my practice is building and maintaining those relationships and staying in touch with that community and remembering that the world is enchanted. The reason that I do that at all is because I don't want to lose it. Because, like, if I'm really raw and really honest, I have felt that magic since I was small, and I was lucky enough that at a critical point, like just before I hit puberty, just before I was getting to that point where everyone starts to really disbelieve in, I mean, fairies for me, the fair folk were like key for me. And that kind of point where I was starting to think, oh, maybe my teachers are just humoring me when they say, oh, you know, the fairies obviously like you or whatever. Maybe they're just humoring me. I started to think that, and I encountered, as I said earlier, books where there were people who were writing about this, adults who were seriously writing about it, publishers who were publishing it. I'm like, okay, so there is space in this world for this. And I was lucky enough to move through that and to keep hold of that thread. And I have seen so many people who have lost that sense and that connection. And the world is poorer for it. So underlying the why, the deep why for this, is because it feels so important to me that we remember culturally, that we remember that the world is enchanted, that there are those spirits there, that there is that network. And so I keep doing my practices to remember it myself, because I need that in the world, and I can see that other people need it too. And aside from that, they look after me. I'd be pretty screwed if they didn't. There's so many times where things have looked rough, and if I hadn't been apparently lucky, I'd have been in trouble financially, or like with housing or all sorts. And just somehow at the right moment, normally coinciding with a prayer or a please help, something turns up. So, yeah.
So, curiosity question.
Mm-hmm.
You know how in Peter Pan, in the cartoon, the movie,
Mm-hmm.
they're like, clap your hands because it helps strengthen the fairy, Tinkerbell. It helps her be stronger if you believe in her. Do you think that it works like that?
I actually don't. The way I think that it works. So, and I'm just playing that phrase. I do believe in fairies. I do. And there's a description by when they first started putting the stage show on in London of Peter Pan. So it was a book, and then they made it into a stage show, and it was like one of the earliest pantomimes as we know pantomimes. And I don't think you've got pantomimes in quite the same way we do in the UK. It's a very weird British tradition. But each like Christmas or New Year, depending on like your locale, it can be a January thing. It's an all family show, and I could tell you a bit about the history. It came out of the Commedia dell'arte and the Harlequinade and those sort of characters, the clowning and things. But they take a traditional story or a well-known story, normally like Cinderella or Peter Pan, and people play these stock characters, and you know how the story pans out. But there's comedy and there's humor and there's drama, and there are phrases where you're like, it's behind you. Have you ever heard you must have encountered that, like references to the pantomime where people are like, it's behind you, and the person's going, what, where? And they're just somehow not looking at the thing behind them. Have you seen that sort of thing? Yeah, like that comes from pantomime. So there's these ridiculous things, and you get the panto dame, who is someone dressed in drag who's like comedic relief, but that like there's a long tradition here. So anyway, to go back to when Peter Pan was first put on the stage, there's a description by one of the journalists that I read, and I can't remember who it was, who said that, this is a ridiculous show. It's for children. So I went into it thinking I was going to be a bit bored. And it got to that moment, and there'd been all these pyrotechnics, and there'd been like children were performing in it. There was much less health and safety at the point, so it was quite dangerous. There were children flying around on wires, right? And disappearing through trapdoors. And so it was this big production. But that moment where Peter Pan is like, you have to clap for Tinkerbell, and the Peter Pan is there, and I think Tinkerbell was just this little light that they had, and the light begins to flicker, and Peter Pan turns to the audience and says, you have to clap and say you believe to bring Tinkerbell back. And there's just this moment of stunned silence. And there's this moment where you think, all right, no one's going to do that. No one believes in fairies. No one believes in magic. No one's going to buy into this. And then all of a sudden, the whole audience begin to clap. I do believe in fairies. I do. And the description was of the face of the person playing Peter Pan, the principal boy, who sort of like was watching this light flickering, and it began to grow brighter, and their face lit up as Tinkerbell came back to life. And you watch the audience as everyone, just for that moment, feels the magic returning to the world in this tiny, ridiculous act of clapping your hands and saying you believe. And so for me, I don't think that they need our belief. They don't need our belief to live, to exist. Our ancestors, our human spirits, like, there's a long tradition of, like, if we are not fed when we pass on, like we get hungry, we need that support, because a part of our humanity, like the bit that makes us human and connected to the living, begins to fade away from not being fed. And I think that that's the aspect of our relationship as the living to the dead. That's in that relationship. And in this case here, when we forget that there is magic in the world, when we stop believing, we begin to close our eyes to it. We disconnect from it. We pull away from it. And then we treat the world that we share with these beings, and particularly the fair folk, are spirits who are very, very close to our level of vibrational existence, if you want to think of it that way. They're very, very close to the material world. So they're very closely connected to the manifest world that we live in. So we close our eyes. We forget that they're there. We stop believing, so we disconnect. And that means that we lose a part of ourselves. Culturally, we lose access to a part of ourselves, which incidentally makes us easier to control and easier to turn into cogs and easier to, all of that jazz. So there's a very good reason for the overculture to want us to forget this. But we forget and we pull back. And that means that they then lose an ally in the world. They then have to deal with us treating the world as pure material, as pure resources, as something to be used. And because they share this world with us, they then have consequences to deal with. But it doesn't weaken them as beings. They're still powers. They're still there. The magic is still there. It's just us that have forgotten. It's us that have closed our eyes and our hearts and our senses to that. And that, I think, is why it's important for us to take that moment to really, really feel what we knew as children, what we knew in ages past, that magic is real. The fair folk are real. The spirits are real. The powers behind what we call the gods, by whatever names and faces that we meet them in, they're real. Those beings are real, and they're there. And by refusing to clap, by refusing to believe, we lose sight of them.
I feel like I'm listening to NPR. You're giving a lecture in the best way. In the best way.
I mean, I did say, Doctor of Philosophy. I did my PhD in the philosophy of storytelling. So, I'm no stranger to the academic world. I've been out of it for a little while. It did take me 12 years to do my PhD. So I've been out of that space, but I do love it. I do enjoy it. So
this is a delight.
Thank you. I'm glad you qualified that, like, in a good way.
Yeah, in the best way.
Yeah. It's something I'm really passionate about, right?
Good. I love hearing people talk about something they enjoy talking about.
Yeah.
Speaking of, what's something you wish more people would ask you about?
On the one hand, right, I don't generally need people to ask me about the things that I'm interested in, because I will just tell them. And I'll go, like, so here's
Neurodivergence.
exactly, right? So I'm like, here's this really cool thing. And if they go, oh, that's interesting. And then I'll go, do you know about it? Do you want to know more about it? Like, but there's something. So one of the things that I love to talk about, one of the things that I get really excited about is actually when people start asking me really philosophical questions about the metaphysics of the world. So like I hinted at it a little bit, and you were kind of asking a little bit about, like, how do you believe that they need us? Is basically it, right? Do you believe that they'll lose power if we don't
Kind of
believe
like
in them?
the American Gods situation.
Yeah, or Terry
That story
Pratchett's
where
model. Yeah. Sorry, carry on.
that was it. Just the American Gods where they were getting weaker because we were moving on to other things.
Yeah, and like I think that there is an aspect where, so I think of it as the Terry Pratchett model in Small Gods. So if you know Pratchett, if you don't know Pratchett, then absolutely like read some of his
Get to
books.
know him.
The Witches series, yeah. His series on the witches, the characters are amazing. If you have spent any time in particularly pagan communities, you will recognize these people. And the way that he describes aspects of how magic works is, it's like, was he a practitioner? And I don't think he is, but he hits on some real truths. And it's that, like, that thing that the gods feed on our belief, and they get small and fade away if we stop believing in them. And I don't think that that's as I say, I don't think that that's the case. But the behind those gods, there are particular powers, there are particular spirits that are their own things, but they will sometimes, like, they'll withdraw from interacting with us. They may have less impact in our lives. So things like that, we're talking about the metaphysics of how the world works. And I really like to start to have conversations around, like, what's actually going on? What's our best guess and our best theory? And how do we discuss that for how these things work? For what exactly is the difference between a fairy and an angel and a god? Like, how does that model work? How do we distinguish between them? We have an idea that there are differences, but there are overlaps. So, like, what's going on behind that? And often when I start getting excited about that, I can get really into some of the philosophical side of it. And it's all theoretical, right? I can root it in my experience. I can say, well, these things feel like this because, or I'm drawing these conclusions because I've seen these. But then I've philosophized out a model of metaphysics. And yeah, I'd love to talk more about those things with people who are interested in it. And yeah, sometimes some of my students will ask questions that are along those lines, and I'll be like, great, you want to hear about this? Let's have a conversation. And I want to hear what they think about it as well. I'm like, how does this idea, this model, reflect how you have experienced things? Does it, if I say, oh, these are like this model of reality, this idea about how this might work, does it fit with what you've experienced? So one of the examples of this is that I was really curious. So over the years, I've had periodically, I have like encounters and callings and a sense of like the dead going, hello, come and talk to us. And I hear a lot of people talking about ancestor work, and it's like, sit at your altar and pour a cup of tea and light a candle or a glass of water, or like make an offering of what they'd like to your ancestors and sit and have a chat. And I'm like, well, I can sit and have a chat with my ancestral spirits that I know and ancestral spirits that I don't, that are like kind of people. But there are other times where I encounter the spirits of the dead, and they feel different. And when I started trying to go to spiritualist churches, because that was one of the places that people seemed to really be working with magical technology in order to talk to the spirits of the dead and to build those skills for communicating with the spirits of the dead, like an actual place you might be able to go and learn these spiritualist development circles. So I'd go to the churches and watch the mediums. And I've got a certain amount of what you might call the sight, in terms of I could kind of watch and I could see that each one of them was doing something slightly different. One of them had like a dodgy phone line. One of them made a room around himself that you could sort of see the spirits coming into view as they stepped into that room. And then he'd be talking to someone about that spirit and then they'd step out of that room. Through a different direction, not through a specific door. One person made a portal that he was kind of looking through, at which point I had gotten a little bit curious and decided to sort of, and it sounds really woo, but like mentally like step through that to go into that space and go, what's on the other side of this? And I kind of was like looking through that portal and kind of sticking my head through. And the spirit guardians and angels and things that he had around him kind of did the equivalent of a magical bouncer, slammed me back in my body.
Excuse you, ma'am.
Yeah, it's like, don't you meddle with the things. You're not meant to be going, like, this is not your portal. But what was curious about that to me is that when I end up, I sit with my ancestors on, and if we think about it in like a 3 worlds sort of thing, this is the best way I can describe it. Like on this level, I can sit with the ancestors and the ancestors can come to me, or I can travel out to where they are, like on a horizontal plane. When the dead call, I end up sinking down, and there I find bones and not much personality. There's sort of almost a collective thing, and sometimes they're hungry and sometimes they're having a party, and they're like, you're all going to come and join the party in the land of the dead eventually. Like, we're in no rush. You'll come here, you'll join us eventually. But there's no like individual thing. And then these mediums, like they were connecting with individual personalities. And I'm going, what's going on? And so there was this sort of almost a sense of going up. And I started to sort of think about, well, what would explain this? How would this work? And I came back to the model of the multi-part soul or spirit, which we find in so many cultures, which I learned in the fairy tradition, of like the parts of ourselves. There's our body is one of our souls, or one of the parts of our soul. The like animal self is one of the parts, like the rational personality is one part. And it was that kind of that moment where it clicked, oh, those different parts of ourselves can stay together and travel on, or they can separate out and go to different places. And the bit that is in our bones, well, that's the bit that goes down. The bits that sort of like the personality that we'd recognize if we're looking to talk, that's the bit that the spiritualist church, the mediums, are talking to. So I started to kind of like explore that metaphysical world of that model in that context of what happens after death. And now I don't know. And I could have just been imagining it or projecting it or interpreting the information and constructing something. But the more that I build on this and the more that I apply this and go, okay, how does this apply in different scenarios? The more I recognize that, well, it works. It's a functional metaphysical model of that aspect of the world. So yeah, that's those sorts of things are things that I'd like to have more conversations about with more people.
This is so interesting. Sometimes I pass out.
Sure.
And sometimes when I do that, I go somewhere. And it's not like a dream. It's somewhere else. And the most recent one, I actually I had a hip replacement, and I was on some really strong drugs. and I stopped breathing, and my husband had to do CPR to bring me back. And I went somewhere, and I wonder if that's the higher one.
Possibly. Yeah. I think that, like, from the stories that people tell, and from my own sense and my own experiences, when we go journeying out of our body, our conscious mind will go in certain directions. And our conscious mind isn't necessarily traveling with the rest of us, which is why sometimes you can have like an out-of-body experience or an astral projection experience or a journey experience, but actually you've fallen asleep. And somehow, so your conscious mind is asleep and your body's asleep, but your spirit's often doing things. And when you wake up, you've got a sense of an experience that you don't remember having, and you've got knowledge that you gathered because that part of your spirit, that part of your soul, went off and gathered that knowledge and brought it back, but your conscious mind didn't go with it. So when you had that that experience of going out of your body, the consciousness certainly traveled somewhere. And I think our tendency in those situations is to kind of go upwards and go into that space. It feels like an upwards, but in reality, it's kind of more of an outwards, if you think about it, because upwards is in relationship to gravity, and gravity is in relationship to the center of the earth. So we're feeling a sense of down, but we actually mean in, and we're feeling a sense of up, but we actually mean out and expanding. So you're sort of expanding out into that space, which is more ethereal, which is comfortable for the mind, comfortable for the consciousness, comfortable for those parts of our spirit, rather than the down and in, which is more where our bones settle and where parts of our soul like fit in that deep, dense space.
This is so interesting.
Like, does that sound like that? Does that resonate?
Well, yes, it makes enough sense that I feel like I understood what you said.
Right. And I'm 100% sure that some of your listeners, at the very least, will have had experiences, and they'll be going, "That's not what it felt like to me." Right?
I'm sure, because you're not in this body with me.
Exactly. Because we're all different, and we all have different inclinations. And what we share, as like, if you're listening to me now, you will probably share the human experience, right? A certain amount of human experience with me.
Probably.
And I think probably we share more than we have. There's more similarities than there are difference, right? As far as I'm concerned. But there are still variations and differences. And some of us are much more comfortable going down than they are going up. So those experiences might be different, or the outwards. And where you gravitate towards, if you've had these different experiences, it's like, okay, what does that then tell you about you and where you're comfortable and what parts of yourself you are most consciously aware of and consciously connected to? It's all ways you can start to sort of open those questions if you want to go, okay, what does that tell me about who I am in this moment, or who I was in that moment when I had that experience? What does that tell me about what I was trying to move towards or away from? And this is one of the things that for some of us, I know for me, periodically, obviously you with your hip replacement, we'll go through periods of pain where our bodies have a lot of discomfort, right? Or we're going through traumatic experiences and the world is very hard. And so then we might have an inclination towards wanting to kind of disassociate from our body, disconnect from the earth, and then we might float up. And I'm not saying that any of those things as a negative. These are neutral things. Where we need to go in order to protect ourselves, whether that's going up to sort of disconnect from our physicality temporarily, as long as we come back and reintegrate, that's where the health comes in. We have these mechanisms for good reason. We have these abilities for good reason. They're for protecting ourselves. So many people, especially in the US at the moment, let's be honest, will be having disassociative or disconnecting, floaty experiences, right? And this is your mind, your spirit trying to protect yourself. There will be a problem if it goes on for a long period of time, but recognize that actually it's okay. It's not a problem in the moment. It's you're doing, your spirit, yourself, your body, your mind, you're doing what you need to do in order to get through the experiences that you're having, right? For other people, the sinking down, getting more physical. Some people like you might start lifting weights and moving heavy things, right? Those sorts of inclinations towards getting more into the physical, going deep down into the earth, more and more grounded. Like that's another way that for other people can be really, really helpful. But it depends on where you are at what point in the journey, what kind of person you are as to what you need in those moments. And finding the ability to, in the moments where you find that reintegration and that balance is really key. I talk an awful lot within my work. So my book, The Crimson Craft, like the subtitle is Sexual Magic for the Solo Witch. But what it's really about is coming back into embodiment and back into connection with the life force that is being pleasurably alive, right? And that's because for me, I'm a disassociate into my mind, disappear into fantasy books, into academia. That's how I protect myself. And I had to learn and relearn how to be reconnected, how to come back and root into my body. And that's what we're encouraged to do, is to float off rather than come down and deeper. But for some of us, like going deeper in and letting go of the thinking about stuff is also a protective thing. So it's finding that balance between the two that is where health comes, returning to that equilibrium when we have safe space to do so, and making those safe spaces, generally in community. We need each other for those safe spaces, or safer spaces, right? Safe enough spaces to find that equilibrium that we need in order to integrate our experiences, integrate where we're at, reconnect with our magic, and move forwards in the ways that are right for us in those moments, that are helpful, that are supportive.
This is such a good conversation. I love it a lot.
Well, thank you.
I would like you to think about your favorite tool. It doesn't necessarily have to be a physical thing. It can be a philosophy or a quote or a certain smell you like to work with. What's your favorite tool and how do you use it?
My favorite tool is my voice. So my voice is probably my core magical tool. You'll have noticed throughout this that I've mentioned, you asked about my daily practice, and I mentioned prayers, right? Speaking. Now, periodically, I have pushed that and I've lost my voice. So at this point, I need to be quite careful because I've done some damage to it, because I'm a performer, I'm a singer, I'm a storyteller. So I use my voice a lot. So I have had to remember that it's not my only tool and to not push it. And it certainly isn't my only tool, like, magically my body, etc. Like all of those pieces I come back to. When I don't have my voice, I come back to the breath. And when I'm not in a space where I can use my voice, then I will use my words in writing. And so for me, that core tool is in the voice, and then secondarily in sound and in language, all carried through the breath. And I use it in prayer, I love using chants and songs in ritual. I lead guided meditations, and I've practiced and learned ways in which you can use your voice, so the different tones of voice, in order to guide people through different trance states, hypnotic techniques. So actual like therapeutic hypnosis, looking at like how do you use words, rhythm, tone, sound. How do you use those things in order to carry people into deeper connection with themselves, into a space of openness where they can access information, where they can connect with spirit, where they can journey. So I use my voice to guide people on journeys and then bring them back. And the same again, how do you use your voice to anchor people back down into their body? So all of those things, and obviously all of that is very much about working with other people, telling stories. These techniques come in as well. But remember, people include not just the other embodied living humans, but also the trees, the waves, the spirits, and my own self. So I use my voice as a way of carrying myself through those spaces. I will sing myself through those spaces. I will sit by the sea and sing to the sea, and the sound of the waves and the wind will keep me safe from prying ears. And I will sing with the spirits there as an offering, as a communion, as a connection, but also as a healing. Those vibrations, those sounds move through me, and they shift my energy and reconnect me with things and help me remember that enchantment. And all of those things apply to words more generally and language more generally.
That's so interesting. I was realizing that I do a little bit of that. I have this phrase that I sing on Thursdays. I work with this group of people. It's Hive House. It's my patrons. I work with them, and on Thursdays I have this certain way that I sing this phrase to sort of help me connect with the being that we're working with. And I never thought about it the way you're phrasing it. So that's really interesting that I actually do it.
Yeah. Most people do, in one way, shape, or form, either use their voice or language in magic. But it's quite common that people don't think that they do. And this is something that I've noticed. So my most recent book is Storytelling for Magic, and I'm releasing a course called The Cauldron of Arwen. So we're working with Ceridwen and Taliesin. So if you don't know, Ceridwen is the Welsh goddess, put very briefly, of inspiration and initiation, and Taliesin is the greatest bard that ever lived, that was born from her cauldron, as it were. So we'll be working with their story. And the reason that I wrote Storytelling for Magic and that I've put together this course is because so many people come up to me after I've told a story, particularly if I've done it in ritual. So you tell the story, it's partly as a trance, it's partly as an incantation, it's partly as a charm. You're telling these stories in these magical spaces. And they'll come up to me and go, oh, that was beautiful. I felt I felt this, I felt that. I wish I could do that. And every single person, I turn around and I say, but you do. I heard you tell a story over a cup of tea before the ritual. I heard you tell a story to someone the other day. They asked you what you'd done that afternoon, and you said, oh, funny thing happened. And you told them a story. Because we're storytelling creatures, right? We're storytelling animals. This is what we do. So we tell our stories. And for those of us that aren't comfortable, I'm obviously a very wordy person, and you're obviously a wordy person as well. You've started a podcast, right?
Well, I'm a nosy person.
But there are other ways of being nosy. You specifically chose to ask people to come and talk to you and to talk with you. Right?
That's
so,
fair.
Yeah. But there's like that aside, right? Some people aren't wordy in the way that I'm wordy, don't either can't or don't use their voice, aren't as comfortable in like the vocal communication that I always come back to. I've always been a chatty person. Though believe it or not, for several years I had such bad stage fright that I couldn't talk to more than one person at a time, or I'd freeze up and start crying. So that was not a fun period of time. But anyway, that aside, I overcame that. For those that aren't vocal, you still tell stories. Like, you write on social media. You might knit in colours that you have chosen that express something. And I know people who will crochet the most beautiful shawls for a deity, right? And so when someone says, oh, what's that? Like, what's like, that's beautiful. They go, oh yeah, I made this for Artemis. And they'll talk a little bit about Artemis. They'll go, oh, she loves these things, like goddess of, and I've chosen Artemis and I'm actually not that close with Artemis, and they'll talk a little bit about that goddess and about why those colors. And they might use very few words. But while they're doing that, the person is looking at the crochet and like taking those pieces of those concepts, and the story is being shared. There are all sorts of different ways we tell our stories, in the way that we dress ourselves, in the way that we write. I've seen the most beautiful of elemental invocations by someone who is oftentimes mute, invoking water with now what did they call them? It was hand prayers, a form of sign language that utilized the shapes as evocative, and they were telling a story through those shapes.
I'm hearing you say this, and I'm thinking of people in my group who say, oh no, I don't do those things. But you do knit, you guys. I see you.
Yeah. And when people say to you, oh, what's that you're knitting? You go, oh, this is a temperature snake. And so each line of it shows the temperature of the day. Aren't they great? I wish I had the patience to keep one of those up.
Me too.
I'd like knit maybe 3 weeks of one of those. Yep. And then I'd save it all up to the end and be like, oh no, now I've got to do the whole thing.
No, it's too much and I can't do it.
yeah, I'm just going to have the head of a snake on my wall. But like, yeah, that sounded really terrible. But yeah, but I have so much respect for people who can tell those stories in those ways that take months to knit, to weave, to crochet these pieces. And then when people ask about them, they can say, oh, this is where it comes from. And they show, like the temperature snakes, they're like, oh, these are the ideas and this is where the colors are. And as the person looks at them, they say, oh, that's the story of the temperature of that year. And the fact that you chose a snake, that then communicates something. Or knitting a blanket for someone's newborn baby. Someone goes, oh, what are you up to? You're like, oh, and you tell them. And you might tell them what their relationship is to you. And you're starting to share your story in that moment. And that then builds up into all these other moments where you share your story in these little pieces, not in a great long monologue or a narrative like I might do. I can get up on the stage and I can monologue at people. That's easy. You give me 20 minutes to tell a narrative in the spotlight. I'm a Leo. I'm in my element. Like, that's really easy for me. But to tell your story over the course of a 6-month project where you share a little bit about the inspiration here and then you show the way that pattern unfolded and the colors that you chose. all of that, that's weaving a story in a way that weaves people into your life in a much deeper way than those moments. I'm not saying that it's more powerful or less powerful or better or worse. It's a different way, and each one has their place. And this is why us all being different is such a beautiful and wonderful thing, because we need to weave our stories in all of these different ways in order to build a community. I need people who are like that around me to remind me to be in that long form connection, to notice those patterns over the years, to remember that you can tell the story in something tactile and be reminded of it every time you pick it up, rather than words that just disappear in the moment. And perhaps you need people like myself, where the stories are different in each moment because they are told, they are created in that intangible meeting between teller and listener, in that moment where the sounds are, and that moment where the story is happening, where the space and the time and the context of what's happening in the world around you all feeds in to that momentary story and the magic that spills out of it and the transformation. Like, that is a different form of magic and a different form of story that has its own power. That is, they're all equally needed.
You said you're doing a podcast yourself, right?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
good, because I hope you go into these things. Because I just want to listen to this forever.
Well, this is okay. Commercial break. But seriously, each month I share a live stream where I put on my fairy doctor persona, and I have an actual antique, like, doctor's bag. I say antique, it looks vintage. It's, and in it I have jars of yarn in different colors, and I pull one out at random, and they've got like a label with some keywords on it, and I tell the story of that yarn, and I'll share the story, and then afterwards I'll share some reflections either on the nature of the magic of story or the magic in that story. And of course, the fairy doctor, it's the medicine that is in story. So if you encounter it, whoever encounters it in that day, if it pops up in your feed or you encounter it weeks later, like, that medicine is what you needed in that moment. So I'm casting it as an enchantment, as a spell. I'm sharing it as a piece of magic. But yeah, if you want to come and listen to me tell stories and talk about the magic that is in stories, that's on YouTube once a month. And I share about that in the Enchanted Academy community. So the replays all end up in there as well on YouTube.
This is amazing. I'm excited.
But come and join us. Absolutely, please do. And yeah, maybe you might want to come on my podcast as well, and I can hear about what you're up to then.
Okay. That brings me to a different question, which is, what steps have you taken to build community near you? Because we have a lot of internet community, but I'm interested to hear if you've done anything locally.
Yeah. So I'm going to start like on the outer circle and then kind of build my way inwards. So, like, as I mentioned, the Enchanted Academy community, that's an online community, right? So that's like the broader circle. And I'm a member of the Reclaiming Witchcraft tradition. And I teach at the witch camps, and I've offered community classes with other teachers. So that's in person. And we do have an online, I'm helping to organize Worldwide Witch Camp, which we're coming up on our third year. It will be this coming autumn, fall. So that, again, that's an online event. But the people and the tradition I know through meeting in person. So Reclaiming has in-person events, witch camps, gatherings, and what have you across Britain. And at one point there were more of them, and it's getting less and less. less and less often because the people who organise these are getting older, are disabled, and have fewer spoons and less energy to be able to do these things. So this is one of the reasons a lot of stuff's moving online. So that's kind of like the big community in Britain. Is like I've helped support those. I helped to set up Dragon Rise in 2009, which is an in-person camp that happens every other year. And I was there in person. So that was to help support the reclaiming community in Britain and in Europe. And then to bring it down right really, really local, which is where actually the real magic really, really happens. And what I hope people who come to those bigger events that are like every other year that are happening like on a more international scale, when you go to those, I hope that you take these back to your local community, because that's what I try to do. So what I do in my local community and what I've done for many years is to run a moot. Me and a friend of mine run a monthly social, and lots of moots are in the evening in a pub. And I live, as I said, on the wild, wet, windy west coast of Wales. We are out on the edge of nowhere. I live in a small town, reasonably. It's the hub of the area, but the public transport in and out of spaces and driving down those windy roads at night can be really tricky. So what we did was we started our moot in the afternoon in a cafe, and I had to move around a little bit until we found one that really worked, and landed in one that has comfy sofas, that does food and is open until 10 o'clock at night. But we run it from 3 o'clock in the afternoon until about 7 o'clock. So the people who want to come after work can come to the later part. And the people who want to get home before it gets dark in the winter, who have animals to go home and feed, because there's a lot of people who have small holdings and farms around here, or people who need to get buses, they come to the earlier part. And there's normally a little bit of overlap in the middle. So we deliberately chose that time in order to make it as accessible as possible and put it in a cafe rather than a pub, so that we weren't surrounded by alcohol, because many of our community either don't drink for one reason or another, or are uncomfortable around a lot of drunk people. So we have people who are in recovery. And so it's safe for them to be there. And we also know that we're not going to get lots of rowdy drunk people going, "Oh, what are you up to then?" Right? That's a weird tattoo. "Oh, you've all got stars on. What are you doing?" Like, there's a certain amount of chill there, of calm. So we set up these moots and we run them once a month. It's been every month for about, just trying to think if it's 2 years or 3 years now. And obviously over all the lockdowns and the pandemic, a lot of things stopped running. So what had been running before had stopped running. So we started doing these. And the way that we started it was literally, I put a post up on Facebook saying, "I'm starting a moot. I'm going to be in this cafe from this time to this time. I'll grab a table. Come along and find me." And I said it to friends, and said in that post, "Tell your friends." And the first time, 2 people showed up. And then the next, and one of those was like, "Let's run this together." And I'm like, "Yes, please. It's much better if you're not trying to do it all on your own, because when one of you's having a difficult month, a low spoon month, the other one can pick it up. So it's better to do it with friends if you can." And so the next month, did it again. And this time, the 2 of us were there, and 2 people that I kind of knew that were Facebook friends came, and they told their friends. And there were about 5 or 6 of us. And Every month since then, it's been a slightly different combination of people, but we've had between 4 and 12 people show up from all different paths, from all different walks of life, all different ages, all different genders. And it's just beautiful having that social space to meet people who are, sometimes we like heathens will come. We've got a couple of people who are Wiccans. We've got a ceremonial magician who's been doing it for, I don't know, 50 years at this point, I think. And he's sort of reaching the end of his life and looking back on things. And some of the people that come have some health issues. And so what's come out of this is that if we notice that they're not doing very well, people check in with them. We check in with each other. And this grew out of holding that space. And me and my friend were very, very clear. We're like, this is a social space. And we are going to be careful about it being invite by word of mouth. So we don't publicize the when and where publicly. We'd get more people if we did, right? Loads more people would turn up if we just posted it as a public Facebook post. There are lots of groups which will share that for you. And there'd be a lot of people that would come along. But we do it through word of mouth so that we know that the people who are turning up are kind, are not turning up to stir trouble, are not inclined towards starting drama. And if things like drama starts arising, because all humans together, we're quite careful to just go, look, maybe this isn't the place for that. Like, let's see what we can, let's go and have a cup of tea elsewhere and like see if we can chat it through and chill out a bit. So there's a little bit of pastoral care and a little bit of holding that space and a little bit of being very clear that, you know what, hello, nice to meet you, you're new. What name would you like us to call you by, and what are your pronouns? Like, how do you want to be referred to? How do you want to be welcomed into this space? So each person is welcomed in that moment. And when new people are invited in, everyone is asked, it's like, well, you know, we'll all go around and share who we are and what our paths are and what our pronouns are and how we'd like to be addressed and how we want to be respected. And some of our members are really confused by this, but they're like, okay, this is fine. This is how we respect each other. They don't really understand why, because it's new to them. But that culture of respect builds that. And then out of that, those that meet at those moots, when there's one of the festivals, one of the Wheel of the Year festivals coming up, we'll have a chat. So in January, we had a chat about Imbolc coming up. And I've had a hunt around for spaces that will let us use the space in return for buying a cup, like use a private space in return for buying a cup of tea and a piece of cake or for a couple of quid donation or whatever. And we've tried a few different places, but we found a cafe that has a separate lounge that they will rent out, and they're happy for us to use it if everyone just buys a cup of tea and a slice of cake. So we all get there. We have a slice of cake and a cup of tea or whatever people fancy. And we co-create our rituals because we're all coming from different traditions. We sort of set a date and a time, and I go and get in touch with the place and let everyone know, yeah, we've got the place for that time. Or my friend will do it if I'm snowed under. So we look after each other. And we gather together in that moment at that time. And so yesterday we got together at 3:00 in the lounge space in the cafe, and they've set up a little fold out screen so that we can sort of screen ourselves off. And we said, okay, right, how's everyone doing? Have a bit of a check-in. So what does Imbolc mean to you? What have people brought that you would like included in our Imbolc ritual? in this ritual for recognizing this moment where we're midway between the winter solstice and the spring equinox, where we're really feeling those lengthening days, where we're noticing the flowers budding. And we ask and listen to each other, and we learn from each other. And then we sit and think, okay, so how do we want to cast our circle today, or demarcate our space today? And sometimes someone will bring a circle casting, sometimes someone will bring a chant that they'd like to do to call on the Dizir or cast a circle of the ancestors. Sometimes we'll breathe together for the earth, the sea and sky, that which some of us have picked up from Obod, one of the modern druid orders. And it's whatever roots us in that moment. And we all sort of piece together, how do we want to do this ritual? And each person will take a piece, and I'll normally write it down so that if anyone forgets that it's their turn, I can go, okay, would you like to light that candle and say that charm that you were going to do? And sort of cue people. And we co-create, and then we do those rituals together. And that in itself both allows us to mark the time and celebrate and engage in a bit of magic. Sometimes we do healing magic for each other. We often do divination for each other. And we're building and sharing our skills. But it also acts as a community bonding and building process, because we're coming together and sharing those things. The reason that we are meeting at the moots is because we all have a shared interest in magic and paganism and ritual and community rooted around those things. So those rituals actually give that space. But because it's not a set tradition, we had to work out, well, how do we integrate all of the different paths people are walking? And that's one of the places that my many years of creating ritual in reclaiming specifically, but also just because I'm an experimenter, came in, was going, okay, well, let's see if it's possible to weave this together. And we're very, very lucky that when the weather's nice, my friend that runs the moot with me and sort of takes point, we kind of take it in turns to facilitate the creation. He'll bring a bunch of firewood, and if the weather's nice and the beach is quiet enough, we'll go and have a fire on the beach and do our ritual on the beach. But if it isn't, we've got this space because we've talked to the people in the local town. And that's one of the keys. I've gone around and gotten to know the people who run the cafes, who run those spaces. I've checked out those spaces and gone, where is going to be comfortable for our people? And where are the staff going to be comfortable with us coming in? There's a beautiful tiny cafe, which we could just all squeeze into. But if we did, we'd fill up their space for 4 hours and they'd never be able to sell enough. They wouldn't be able to stay in business because they wouldn't have other customers coming in. So we don't use them for our meetings, but we'll often meet there if individuals want to meet up socially because we want to support them. So we work in tandem with those actual local businesses run by local people or staffed by local people. And we ask what the people who meet at the moot and who come together, who actually turn up. It's like, what do you want to do? When do you want to meet? When are you free? When do you want to do a ritual together? And how do you want to weave that ritual? What's the magic that is important to you? What do you need in this moment? And that's where the magic has to come from. That's where the community has to come from. It's like, what does the community need? It doesn't matter what I think everyone should be doing. If I go in and dictate it, that's not building that community. That might be I can set up a training group and do that. And that's great fun, or put on a performance. But that's a slightly different thing. So yeah, it's basically pick a place, pick a time, put out the call and say who wants to meet for a moot and just have a chat and turn up.
I feel like you basically just told us how to start our own community in our own neighborhood.
Yes, please do. And and if anyone ever is like, oh, I don't know how, I'm not sure, how do you do this? I'm always really happy to just go, oh, these are the steps, and this is how you make it so simple and so easy that all you need to do is pick a time, turn up, and just keep turning up. And if there's a need for that, like, people will turn up, and they will turn up consistently, because they need it.
I love it. I would like you to think about the 3 biggest influences on your practice, whether it's people or a book or some kind of theory, and thank them for how they influence you and what you do.
So this might sound a little bit flippant. And I'm going to ask people to bear with me for just a moment. But first, I'm going to thank Tinkerbell. And specifically Tinkerbell, like the fair folk in general, you know that you are very, very dear to me, and I would not be where I am without you. But specifically, that very, very modern Tinkerbell who snuck through the bars of rationality to be cheeky and, sexy and cross and joyous and magical in that movie that I knew so well as a child, like specifically that Tinkerbell. Because you are the character, you are the being that stuck with me when I was too small to really understand or follow the folkloric fae, understand those old stories that tell of those beings that are deep in the land. And you brought that little thread through into my life and helped me connect with that magic, so that when I was ready, I could follow that sparkling, shining pixie dust along that golden red thread into the realm of fairy, and to connect with my queen and my allies and those beings that guided me and that guide me now. And I know that they were behind you at that point. And I know that people get really cross about, Tinkerbell, fairies aren't like that. But you open that door. You are a little window. You are a key in the keyhole that helped me find my way home. And for that, I am ever so grateful. On a more serious, I suppose, and traditional note, the things that have influenced my practice oh so deeply, the Anderson fairy tradition. I found mention of that when I was 16 in college on it was like the earliest set of computers that were starting to, like, there were now banks of computers in the library. So this is dating me a little bit. And I went on the computers and I was looking for stuff about fairies. So thank you, Tinkerbell. Thank you to the Queen of Elfhome. And in that search, the Anderson fairy tradition popped up. And whoever it was that put that website up with all of those things that you shouldn't have been sharing, right? Like, you shouldn't have been putting. That was very naughty of you. And that made many people very, very grumpy. But, a hat tip in thanks, because for many of us, again, those doors come in the most unlikeliest and cheekiest of places. And that magic that called to me through that. So to the star goddess and the gods of fairy who called to me through that door, who reached out and lit my life up with blue fire, who helped me to face and forge myself into all of who I can be and continue to do that so that I can be wholly myself as a witch, as a magic weaver in the world, in circle with you, my beloveds. Thank you. And of course, side thanks to Victor and Cora Anderson for bringing that into the world. And there are so many like writers and teachers and people that I could thank, like as like for third place, and gods and spirits, but I think that I have to come back to the magic and the power of story. That is core and primary and foundational to so much of what has guided me through the world and through magic and through my life. So to stories and storytelling and all that is story, thank you.
Check. That was so good.
I now feel like I need to go and like make some offerings of thanks to all of the beings that I'm like, and you as well, like my beloved ancestors and mighty and beloved dead, and you know, guardians, and the goddesses that have guided me, and like all my patrons and things. And I'm like, you know, and particularly the fairy queen, like, you know, I did mention you. So, you know, I will be doing that afterwards. So like, thank you, all of you as well. But yeah, I think for the purposes of this conversation, that pretty much sums me up. Tinkerbell, the Anderson fairy tradition, and story.
Oh, my heart. It's full.
Good. That's what I want.
Do you have any advice for new practitioners?
I have a lot of advice for new practitioners. But the thing that I always come back to, and the thing that I would encourage people to come back to, I think there are three pieces that are really, really key. And one of those is that while it is important, like it's really important to listen and read and like explore what other people are sharing, and to understand as best you can, to find out as much as you can about the context of practices and of pieces. And so when you're reading or learning about something, actually exploring, where do those historically and culturally, where do they come from? It's really important to do that. But it's also really, really important to remember that you are yourself. You're unique, and you have things about yourself that are not going to fit exactly what other people tell you should do and how you should do it. So if something is challenging, it is worth exploring, okay, why is this challenging? Is it because it is meant to be challenging and therefore I should explore and develop those skills and push myself to go through it? But the other reason it can be challenging is because you're trying to do it in a way that suits someone else and not the way that suits you and your spirits. And there are many, many traditions that have a long history of practice and that root into older traditions, older magical practices, even if they themselves are new now. There are many people that have lots of experience and have tried and tested things, and many of those different paths contradict each other. And so if you are really struggling with something, that doesn't mean that it isn't for you. It might just mean that you need to check out someone else's teaching on it. Check out another context. Don't ditch things just because it's challenging, because some of it will be, and that's because you need that space to grow. But do look at them and go, is this challenging because it's hard, or is it challenging because it is not right for me in this moment? And you might come back to it. So like, that's a kind of an abstract, more general thing. It's like, learn as much as you can about things and go as deep as you can into things. But know that there are other options out there if something isn't right. And this also goes like not just with specific practices and specific things. And I'm going to give an example. This is a cliched example. Everyone says that you need to meditate, right? Meditation is a really important tool. It's a really important technique. I know that all of my ADHD kin are already switching off, right? The thing with meditation is look at, why is it that it's recommended? What is the skill that you are developing when you are told, sit still for 5 minutes every day and focus on a candle flame or whatever it is? Like, what's the skill behind that? And the skill behind that, part of that is developing the strength of will and discipline in order to focus yourself on the things that take focus. It's building up some magical muscles, but it's also giving yourself space to let stuff come up that you need to face. So you're not distracting yourself by the world, with the world, from your own inner thing. So it's giving yourself that space to listen to what's going on. So there's like multiple layers. So take those and you go, okay, I physically cannot sit still, like stuck still, for more than about 2 minutes because my joints seize up. What can I do instead? For me, I like walking meditation, moving meditation. My body needs to move. And so I find the point of focus, the equivalent of the candle flame, in the breath, in the piece of music, in the movement. And I practice bringing my attention back to that. In the walking, if I have to stay more still, in rocking, find something that fits with your body and your mind that allows you to develop those skills and to open that space for yourself. And that goes for every magical practice. There will be a way of developing the skills that is for, that suits you. The second one is that if you are really, truly interested, really, truly looking to learn magic, and in particular witchcraft as I've described it, of being in those relationships, then know that what that takes is recognizing and believing and acting as if, when you find it hard to believe, it is really real. Know that those spirits are really beings that are really there, that you can really enter into a real relationship with. This stuff is real. It is true. When I started out, I was reading a lot of things. I could feel that magic that was there and I didn't want to lose it. And it called to me. But my rational mind, even as a preteen, was like, yeah, but it could all be psychology. It could all just be in my head. And so the approach that I took was to go, right, what would I do as a scientist? What would I do if this might be real or it might be all in my head? Well, if I decide it's all in my head, I'm never going to encounter it if it's real. But if I suspend that disbelief and go, it might be all in my head, but I want to know if it's real. So I'm going to put that to one side, and I'm going to experiment, and I am going to act as if. I am going to treat those beings that I encounter as if they are real, with respect, as though they are beings to meet. And I'm going to enter into being in that relationship with them. And okay, I had a head start because I'd already been doing that with the trees and the plants and the rocks and the, but I stepped into that space and went, okay, maybe deities are imaginary friends, or maybe they are really real. And if they're really real, I want to know. So I'm going to treat them as if they're really real and see what happens. And over the time, and it takes time to develop that relationship. It takes time to encounter these beings. It takes sitting in your land and feeling the land beneath you. And that can be literally outside in the landscape, or it can be at an open window in that, so that you can feel the wind and listening to and feeling that air coming in through your window if you can't get out. Lying down and feeling the earth beneath you and tuning into that and the spirits that are there. Over time, treating these beings as real, engaging with them with that respect in a real relationship. The experiences that I had showed me that it was real. So if you want to do this, know that it is real. And even if you can't quite bring yourself to believe it, give yourself that time to experience it and make a decision either way. After time, after stepping in wholeheartedly. And my third piece of advice is go and find the stories. Find the stories of the people who have built the traditions that you're stepping into. Find the stories, the histories of the books, of the cultures that you are curious about. Find the stories that are offered, that are open to you, and learn and listen. Learn those stories, understand those stories, because those stories open up clues and cues. They give you context. And as you listen to the stories and find the stories of the people, the authors that have written books, the people who have built traditions, and the folk tales and the fairy tales and the legends and the myths of the deities that you are engaging with, of the land that you are on. And this is important, that you do your best to find the stories of those beings that you are actively engaging with, because the easiest folk tales to find are the ones from Northern Europe. And as a friend pointed out to me recently, if you've never been to Britain, and you've never been to like the southwest of England, you may not realize that our land is literally how it is described in Narnia and in The Hobbit and the Shire, right? Those stories are based on this landscape. So when you're listening to the stories, when you're reading those fantasy stories, and the same applies to folktales, when you're reading about the experiences of Northern European people within the forests, those forests are very different to the redwood forests in California, right? So your forest may be very different. And you may not have the stories of your local landscape. So you may have to find the stories that are open to you from Northern Europe, because we not only are like, yes, listen to our stories, but we're also like, here, these are the true stories, which, but you can use those stories, explore those stories and go, okay, if these are showing me something about that landscape, how can I find the keys to understanding this landscape if I don't have access to the folk tales and the folk stories? What are the stories of the people that have been here? What are the histories of the indigenous people that have been here? What do I know? What are the names of the places? And what are the stories that the trees tell when you sit with your back to them? What are the stories that the wind whispers to you when it moves through the valleys of the buildings in your city? What are the stories of the city that you are in? If you're a city dweller, if you grew up in a town and a city, what are the stories there? Who are the characters, the historical people? How did that place come about? And those will start to open up the magic of the place that you are in and how you can deepen into relationship. And the myths of the deities that move across the world, that travel quite comfortably, that will help you to tap into the culture and the understanding of those beings. And then to meet them in that bigger space. And where that bigger space of myth and that smaller space of history and local folklore and legend and your experience of that land, encountering it as really real, where that comes about, and you rooting that in your body and your mind and how you are and the kind of person that you are, that's where your understanding of magic will grow from. And so if you are a wordy person and you tell stories, then begin to learn stories and tell those stories. If you like to write about the legends you're finding and the things that you're thinking. If you knit or you weave, you do yarn craft, look up, like, what are the weaving patterns of this area of my ancestors in this place or of this city? If you like to draw, what's the map of the place and what patterns does it show you? Bring your interests into it, because that's that place where magic is. It's in the relationship between you, the spirits, the history, the place. You are a crossroads, and that is where magic is. And now I really feel like I've been lecturing.
I'm so excited for people to hear this episode. I'm so excited. Because I'm thinking about my group and how it applies to each one of them. Oh, I'm so excited.
I'm really glad.
Well, now that you've seen what it's like to talk to me, and you've seen how I ask these questions, who do you think would be an interesting addition to the show? Who should I have on?
So, I think that you might really enjoy a conversation with Irisanya Moon if you haven't had them on your show already.
I have, and I actually got to meet Irisanya last year at Anahata's Purpose.
There you go. Was I right? Was that a good fit?
Yes, they're delightful.
Aren't they just? And the other person, so I think you might enjoy, for very different reasons, is Sarah Mastros. So, and because she is very, very good at getting into the nitty-gritty of the technicalities of magical things. And so I think it would be a really interesting space for possibilities for conversation.
I will definitely look them up.
So her name is spelled S-A-R-A, and then Mastros is M-A-S-T-R-O-S. And they write. She writes about. She's got the Big Book of Incense, which is great, and a poetic translation of the Orphic hymns, which is a really fascinating take on it and creatively interesting, and has the book of the Sorcery of Solomon, which goes into the nitty-gritty of the technicalities of pentacles. So she's generally a really fascinating person with quite a wide-ranging thing, and really nerds out about technical stuff, which can be great fun when you start poking around. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Is there anything else you wanted to talk about? Anything I didn't ask? Any questions you had for me, or anything happening with you?
So now I'm just thinking, do I have any questions for you? And like loads, but I think we'd then be on for another 2 hours, because I want to know how you'd answer all the questions you asked me. So you'll have to come on my podcast, Tea with Halo. The first episode aired yesterday, launched with Imok and Venus in Pisces, which is beautiful for connection and community. So check that out. But the main thing that I've got going on, I've just had my 9th book come out it is called Storytelling for Magic, and it is about storytelling for magic. It is bardic skills and ritual craft for witches and pagans. And even if you don't think you're a storyteller, guarantee you'll find something interesting in there about weaving magic with stories and exploring stories to uncover their magic. And in Storytelling for Magic, I work with, and you will work with, Ceridwen and Taliesin, who I mentioned before. I am launching a course on April Fool's Day called The Cauldron of Arwen, working with Ceridwen and Taliesin and the story of the birth of Taliesin, how Taliesin became the greatest bard that ever was, how he tapped into and connected with divine inspiration, which even the medieval Christian bards attributed as coming from God, but coming to earth through Ceridwen's cauldron. Ceridwen being the archetypal witch, sorceress, and a modern-day pagan goddess. Historically, she probably wouldn't have been called a goddess, but today she absolutely is. And she is the reason I ended up in Wales almost 20 years ago and found my home here. So on the 1st of April, I'm inviting people to take the Fool's Leap with me into the Cauldron of Arwen. And we're going to be exploring over 3 months the intricacies of the stories that you tell. We're going to help you to find your story that you want to really deeply explore, and to develop some of those skills of expression. Whether that's through the voice, this will be particularly good if you're interested in expressing through the voice, either on your own or with other people. And remember, those people can include spirit people. They don't have to be in-person, living, breathing human beings. And exploring how to understand a story, how to find a story, how to learn a story, because memory is one of those things that we get scared of. Like, oh no, how am I going to remember a story? It's much easier than you think, because we evolved to remember stories. And that helps to develop then your memory for other things. So remembering a story and then expressing and sharing a story in magical ways as an enchantment. So how to use all of those skills to enhance your magic. And this will be suitable for almost complete beginners, right the way through to people who have been doing magic for decades, but who want to engage with this kind of bardic process more deeply, and to connect in with the Arwen, with the divine inspiration poured out onto the earth by the goddess of initiation and inspiration, the great witch Ceridwen. So if you would like to find out more about that, and to find my podcast, and to find my online community where all of my courses are hosted, I invite you to come along and find my website, haloquin.net. That's the net under which I catch everything. And there you will find the Enchanted Academy, where you can uncover what those courses are, I have self-study courses that will help you get the basics if you're a complete beginner before you come and dive into the cauldron. And I actually run membership programs so you can join or for a monthly membership and just get absolutely everything that is there under that banner. So do check it out. And just to let you know, I offer scholarships as well. It is really important to me, if you haven't already noticed, that these skills and these magical pieces and that these relationships and these connections are accessible and available to as many people as possible. So the gorgeous folks who can afford to pay full price help to support the scholarships, and for people to come along that need that little bit of financial accessibility. And I would like to just say that I have been in that place more often than not. So I understand what it is like, and that is why I make that available. So haloquin.net/T for all of the courses. You'll find everything on my website, and you can come and join the community for free and check out the magical circles and conversation there as well, if you want to just get a little bit more of a taste of me and ask me some questions before you dive into a course. So yeah, come and find me there. And what I'd ask of you, Kim, is what is the number one thing that you find important in not just creating a community, but in nurturing and supporting communities that you are part of? Not that you're running, but that you're a member of. Like, what do you do, and what do you feel is important to do to help support those communities so they can keep going?
Number one is probably show up.
Yep. Yep.
Because if we don't, there isn't one. But also both, if you see, calling out things that need calling out, but also be willing to be called out without getting hostile about it.
Yeah.
Those are the two big things. But number one is definitely show up, because there are community things here near me, like local things, that I don't show up to.
Yeah.
And I've been thinking about Raven's. Raven, if you ever hear this, she runs the Tucson Pagan Sandwiches community. And I think at least monthly she does a brunch. None of which have I shown up for.
Yep.
And I am publicly acknowledging it. Even though I'm telling everybody else, hey, you need to have public community, you need to have local community. So I'm calling myself out in this to show up.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's exactly the core of it. Community, magical community, any kind of community. The community is in the people being present and interacting. And it takes a little bit of courage. Sometimes it can take a lot of courage, and it can take effort to actually remember to put it on your calendar. Like, that's the key. I have to put it on my calendar. Otherwise I forget. So I put it on my calendar, put an alarm on my phone to remind me that there is this thing that I really want to be a part of. There is this community I really want to be a part of. And then to just, even if I'm not feeling it in the moment before I leave my house, because I'm a natural hermit. I love being with people, but an object at rest will remain at rest. Right. So yeah, like to put my boots on and go out and actually step into that community space, and then be willing to be seen and heard there, to actually ask those questions or put your hand up to go, oh yeah, I could have a go at casting circle, or oh yeah, I'll sit next to that person who I don't know and make a new friend. And that's, yeah, absolutely how those communities it's not only how those communities stay happening and are supported, it is the community. That's being in community. It's showing up and being present and being kind to each other.
Well, the last two things that I ask of my guests.
Mm-hmm.
Thing number one is recommend something to the listeners. It doesn't have to be magical or witchy at all. Whatever you are into this week, recommend it.
So the big thing that's happening this month for me that is both magical and isn't explicitly magical is February album writing month. So it's abbreviated to FAWM, FAWM, and form.org, right? So if you have any interest at all in songwriting, or even in poetry writing, or lyric writing, or writing instrumental pieces, or just going and listening to people making amazing music, the FAWM Challenge is a monthly challenge for the month of February. And at this point, because this is going to go out in March, isn't it? Mm-hmm. You'll have missed the one for 2025. But if you go and sign up, you get to go and listen to what everyone else has been doing and get really inspired. And one of the things I love about this, so the challenge is to write 14 songs, complete songs, whatever complete song means to you, in 28 days. So the month of February, and it was set up as just a fun challenge between friends, and then it was opened out to be a community. And so everyone kind of comes together with this shared goal. In the Northern Hemisphere, it's like the darkest, coldest month of the year, like where I am especially, but like across most of the place. I mean, where you are, you've got shorts and what have you in the desert, but like here it's kind of cold, it's grey. We've just had a couple of days of sunshine, but that means it's about to get frosty and stormy and miserable. Like, the days are getting longer, but the weather is about to get really harsh. It's that last push of winter. So FAWM happens now, where you can go into pull out your notebook, and there are prompts that people share where they set a time, and at the beginning of the hour you get a skirmish prompt, and everyone that's online at that point that wants to join in can just go along at the top of the hour and look at that prompt and go, right, I'm writing a song on that. And it could just be lyrics, which is why I'm like, it also works for poetry writers. So it can just be lyrics, but it can also be lyrics and a melody. Some people are just they just sing into their phone. And some people, they'll strum on a ukulele, and some people do these full-on productions in their computer, or they've got a whole room full of instruments and a drum kit and a guitar, and in an hour they come out with this song that sounds like there was an entire band working on it for months. And you're like, how on earth did you do that? But what I really love about it, not only does it get me writing and inspired and fired up, and I start writing these songs, and quite often I'm just sort of sing a rough melody into my phone and post that. If it's got a melody and lyrics, I'm happy, that's a song. I'll listen back to them afterwards and go, actually, I really enjoy this. So I'm sort of making something, creating something, and then you've got something afterwards, after this cold, dark month or this harsh winter that you can listen to. But you can also, and you are encouraged to go and listen to what other people are making, to read the lyrics that they're sharing, and to comment something supportive, something that you like about it. And I love being able to hear all of these ordinary people. And I am an ordinary person when it comes to music. We're all weird and wonderful and special, but we're also all just ordinary people. And so you get to go and hear what ordinary people create. The full range, from hitting bum notes and scratchy recordings on a phone through to fully produced things where people have spent a week on each one, and they've only come out with one song or 4 songs or whatever. This full range of things, and you go, oh, what I hear on the radio, what I hear on the CDs or on Spotify, that's been so highly produced that it's kind of it makes me feel like making music is unattainable. And then I go and listen to what other people are doing, all in it together, and they're chatting about how they do it in the forums, and they're sharing with each other where they feel proud or where they feel like they've let themselves down, and they're sharing their process. And you just go, oh, making music, writing stuff, creating things, this is just being human. I can do that. I'm a human. And it's so liberating. So even though you'll have missed the official challenge time, I highly recommend that you hop on there right now, form.org, sign up right now, and you'll be able to rifle through and listen to what some of the people have done and have a look through the forum and go, hi, I missed it, but who would you recommend I listen to? What's inspiring? And go and just listen to people making stuff. And there's a longer, more relaxed challenge in the summer, but you can start to see what people are doing. And then when February rolls around next year, you'll get an email saying, hey, form's starting. Do you want to come make some music with us and spend 28 days just being ridiculous humans together and creating stuff for fun? And you'll go, oh yeah, maybe that Halo was onto something.
I just texted my friend Macy because I think this is something that she would really be into.
Oh,
she still has time.
Yeah. It's so wonderful. And like, even if you're not a songwriter, even if you're not a musician, you can just go on there and people will put, like, they'll share instrumentals and say, I'd love for someone to write some lyrics for this. And people will share. Yeah. So people collaborate. People share just lyrics and they're like, I'd love for someone to sing this, but I can't sing. I hear it in like this sort of style, or I don't mind what style it's in. Who would like to sing it? Who would like to put music to it? And you get these amazing collaborations that happen where people pool their skills. And I did a song last year, and it was a really silly song that was like kind of a bit punky. It was out of my normal comfort zone. And I was sort of just being a bit shouty with it over like a hard beat I'd done on the computer. And the lyric was like, I've drunk so much coffee, I can see the future, and I don't like what I see. And it was like, I'm going to do something about this. And someone listened to it and went, oh, I really like this. Can I do a remix? And they did a remix. And I was like, I never would have made that. And now this little tiny silly thing I made has just become something I could have never even imagined was possible. I like, that's the magic of community and creativity and humanity. Like, you get together and you go, I can do this thing. And everyone who starts out is like just this little, you're shy about it, but there's this wonderful supportive vibe where you are actively encouraged to go and support the people who are new and to be supportive, and to, if people want critical feedback, they'll ask for it. And if they haven't asked for it, you don't give it. You go and you find, what do I like about this? And you tell someone what you like about it. And then they know what they're doing well and they feel inspired to do more. And I just love it. Go do it.
So cool.
Yeah.
So the last thing I ask is, please tell me a story. It can be a story from childhood that actually happened to you, or it doesn't have to even be a childhood, just something that happened to you. It can be a story that you heard as a child that you like to share. I just really like stories.
So, okay, I'm going to tell you a story and then I'm going to sing you a song.
Oh,
right? That came out of this. And this is part of my way of saying, look, right, I'm all right, I'll tell you the story and you'll understand this from this point. So when I was a child, when I was very, very young, I would tell stories into my little tape recorder. And then I'd put my little Walkman, or knockoff Walkman, a little tape player with a little speaker on the front, and it was bright red, and it had a yellow front on the speaker, and the buttons were blue. And I'd put it inside my puppet that was like a stuffed teddy bear, but it was a hand puppet. So I'd put it inside this teddy bear, and I'd press play, and then the teddy bear would tell me the story. And I'd also make up songs, and then the teddy bear would sing the songs. And as I got a bit older, I sort of stopped doing that, but I continued making up little stories and singing little songs as I'd walk to and from school. But the problem I had was I could never remember how the melody went. I'd come up with this tune, but I couldn't remember what the tune was. And by the point I was walking to and from school, I'd forgotten my little Walkman. I'd forgotten that I had a little record function. I was already on MP3 players, if I had anything at all. So I couldn't record it. And this was before smartphones with voice notes. So I'd make a note of the words, and I'd try and draw the shape of the music, but I didn't know how to notate notes. So I'd sort of draw them in relation to each other. And then I'd get home and I'd look at it and I'd go, what the hell does that mean? What? This just is dots and lines. And I got really disheartened. And I got to this point where I'd get really nervous, and my best friend was a musician, and she was grade 8 piano and sang in a rock band and all of these things, and I was there going, I can't even remember what tune I was singing to myself 5 minutes ago. How am I supposed to write music? You need to be able to play the piano and do all of these things. And so I stopped writing songs. I stopped singing to myself. I stopped making my teddy tell me stories. I got to the point where I was too nervous to even speak, to even share an idea in front of two people at once, if I noticed. If I didn't notice, I could ramble on for ages, but if I noticed that they were actually listening to me, I'd freeze up and I'd start to cry and I'd forget that I was saying anything, and then I'd go, why are you listening to, why are you looking at me? Why are you staring at me? They'd be like, what? It was that bad. And as time went on, I kept kind of coming back to this sense of I actually really want to write songs. I can feel these songs bubbling up in me. I can hear the songs that the spirits are singing. And I wish I could sing them. And eventually I found my way to supportive spaces where people are like, you know what? It doesn't have to be perfect. And you know what? You've got a smartphone now with a voice note function. You don't need to remember it. Just sing it to your phone and your phone will remember it. Oh. And then I could listen back to what I told my phone and sing it until I remembered it. But I was still shy about it. I was still nervous about sharing it because it meant so much to me. So instead, what I'd share with people is I'm fascinated by fairies. I do magic. I study the fae and the folk tales and the folklore and all of these mythical beings. I look at all these weird things and I'll tell you their stories, but I'm not going to tell you mine. I'm not going to sing you my songs because that's too precious. That's too vulnerable. That's my voice. My voice is my soul. My voice is my spirit. That's my magic. So I'll tell you someone else's stories. And then I came across the term cryptozoologist. And I thought to myself, that's so cool, right? Cryptozoologist, that's such a cool term. And it means someone who studies cryptids. And of course, cryptids, that's actually an American concept. It's those beings that could possibly exist, That's the term. As far as I understand, it's from America. It's the term for those beings that could exist, but we don't have hard evidence. A being like Bigfoot or the abominable snowman or whatever. And I thought that was far too cool for me to ever say I was a cryptozoologist. And then someone said to me, but Halo, you do study cryptids. You do study beings that could exist, but the material world doesn't think there's hard evidence for. You study fairies and folktales. And I'm like, but fairies are real. They're not cryptids. And eventually the penny dropped. And so I still find it difficult to believe that I am cool enough to call myself a cryptozoologist. And I still kind of hide behind the stories rather than singing my songs. And so at a certain point I went, it was actually in the first form that I'd done. I'm like, you know what, I'm going to put these together. I'm going to be really, really brave. And I'm going to write a song that helps remind me that it's not about whether or not I think I'm cool. I'm a cryptozoologist because that's what I do. On my bookshelf are books about fairies that I've written. And I'm going to be brave enough not just to say that, but to sing it. Now, if we were in person, I'd have you sing it back to me to like really remind me and really drum it in. But as we're not, I invite you to take this in the spirit that it is meant, as a vulnerable moment where I feel very, very silly, as a very serious professional pagan and a teacher of magic and a doctor of philosophy, telling you that I'm a cryptozoologist. I'm a cryptozoologist. I talk to fairies. I know fellow philosophers think that I am crazy, but what am I to do when they show up at my door and tell me, have you ever met a fairy scorned before? I'm a cryptozoologist and Bigfoot is my pal. He's still camera shy, but I tell him that it's swell. No one will believe me when I tell them where I'm going, but they're lost really, their ignorance is showing. I'm a cryptozoologist and my world's full of fun. Desi took me for a ride beneath the Scottish sun. She knows all the secret glens the tourists never find, lifts my mood and Nessie doesn't mind. I'm a cryptozoologist and maybe they're not real, but life's too short to deny what I feel. The world's a bigger place than will fit inside a box, so if you think I'll stop, you're well out of luck. I'm a cryptozoologist, they've helped me all my life. At this point I could woo a Selkie wife. They lift our spirits, liven up our day. If you think that's not real at all, I wish you on your way. If you think they're not real at all, they wish you on your way. If you think they're not real at all, well, I'll talk to fairies and I'll woo a Selkie wife. Chat to my friend Bigfoot about his long life. Ride the waves with Nessie, what glories we shall see, and we'll have so much fun. The cryptids are me, 'cause I'm a cryptozoologist. And I'm recruiting. Tell me about your favorite cryptid, and maybe, just maybe, it'll make it into a future version of that song.
Casey, I know you're singing this now. I know Casey is now going to sing that.
Yay! So the lyrics for that, I actually have them available, like they're up Somewhere I'll get the link to you. And there is, in fact, on the lyrics, there is a second page where there are additional verses, some of which that I've written as I've encountered new cryptids, and some of which other people have written in the same rhythm, that are, I want this to be an ever-evolving thing. I want this to be a community song. So if you want to write your own verses and adapt what's there and mix it up and add things to it and play with it and sing it and share it, like, please do. And I will get you the link to the lyrics and make sure that that's somewhere you can find it. And if you don't, then please feel welcome to forget that you ever heard it, and we will disappear like cryptids into the forest.
Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you for having me. It's been a delight.
Oh, good, because I've had a lot of fun. And this has been I'm going to say it, it's been a healing time, a healing more than 2 hours.
Oh, I'm glad. That's all I can wish for.
Okay, everybody go down and click and follow. Go sing. Go learn to tell some stories. And I will see you. Yeah.
Come and find me. Find me in the cryptids. We are real.
And I will see you on the internet. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Your Average Witch. You can find us all around the internet on Instagram at Your Average Witch Podcast, Facebook.com/groups/Hivehouse, at www.youraveragewitch.com, and at your favorite podcast service. If you'd like to recommend someone for the podcast, like to be on it yourself, or if you'd like to advertise on the podcast, send an email to youraveragewitchpodcast@gmail.com. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next Tuesday.